I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our next speaker. The first time I heard Ms. Christina Duarte speak, the first question I asked was, who is she again? And then I said, that is the person I would like to have speak to my team and members of the government of Eswatini. I was taken by the clarity and the passion with which she speaks on issues of African development. We have not given her a lot of time, but I'm sure when she speaks, she will share with us that passion that she has and the clarity she has in terms of what we must do to advance development in the continent of Africa. Ms. Christina Duarte, Under Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, was appointed in 2020 July. She is a member of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration, High-Level Advisory Board on Economic and Social Affairs. She has been advisor to President Paul Kagame and on African Union reforms. She has worked on with the Alliance for a Green Revolution for Africa and many other places that she has been. She also knows government because she served as Minister of Finance and Planning and Public Administration in the Republic of Cabo Verde, where she comes from 2006 to 2016, a whole 10 years to understand the workings of government. And she has served in various other places, including World Bank and the private sector. I do know that she did work with Citibank in my home country of Kenya many, many years ago. So we really want to appreciate you, Christina, and welcome you to deliver your remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, George. What a pleasure to be here. I came from, as you mentioned, I come from a small country, and to have this opportunity to address to a small country, it gives me a particular favor. Your Excellency, the Right Honorable Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Eswatini, Mr. Russell Mimso Dlamini, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, my dear brother Jacob, it's always a pleasure to be with you in these events and to support you. You know that I'm always ready. You just need to touch the button, and I jump. And my dear colleagues, I have been told that I have between 10 and 15 minutes. I will try to keep my time, I promise. I will be touching in 4 issues. First, the need to challenge, the need to question global narrative on Africa's debt. This is the first item that I would like to touch in this. Once we understand why you need to challenge that global narrative, we are ready to move to the second item, to understand the financing paradox of Africa that has captured Africa in the past 60 years. And if you do not address the financing paradox by shifting the paradigm of financing for development, we Africans will be stuck for the next 60 years. Then I move to the third item of my intervention with a question. How does the UN development system support or can support or is ready to support African member states in shifting the paradigm of financing for development? Achieving what I have been saying, an owned sustainable financing for development. And allow me to underscore owned, the world-owned sustainable financing for development, because this is a magic word for us. And then I move to my last item with a question. How can cooperation between international financial systems or among international financial institutions, UN development system, and African member states, and this is a triangle, be improved to scale up investments for national sustainable development priorities. Let me start with the first one, challenging, questioning the global narrative on Africa's debt. Everybody knows in this room, in this meeting, in this retreat, that the prevailing discourse on Africa's economic challenge, once we read reports, studies, etc., centers on debt distress. Debt distress has been the word that seems describe everything that is happening in Africa. And of course, by building a narrative that in a narrow way focus on debt distress, the conversations, of course, the conversation to search for solutions might become biased. So by focus on these factors, the conversation narrows to address debt distress alone. This narrative casts Africa as a continent that, as everybody knows, perpetually on the brink of financial ruin, shackled by its creditors' demand. And this global narrative needs to be challenged. So as everybody knows in this meeting, Africa is often seen as a continent struggling with severe debt distress. And this view is supported in certain way by a reality. Yes, indeed, Africa is in debt distress. But we know that in the past 15 years, African government expenditure priorities have shifted completely. In 2009, debt serving account for 3% of the budget, while education and health expenditures were 18% education and 8% health, respectively. By 2024, debt service has risen to 14%, surpassing education spending, which declined from 18 to 14%, and also on health spending, which slight increase only. So these countries, or African countries, are consuming a significant portion of their government revenues. As my dear brother Jakub mentioned very well in his brilliant intervention, these funds could otherwise be used for critical development needs. So debt figures, as seen in the previous, let's say, section, what I just said, reveal the severity of Africa's financial issues. And we know that most of the traditional reports, even within the UN system, explains debt distress, saying that Africa is over indebtedness. It's not true. This is what we need to challenge. The over indebtedness of Africa is not the root cause of the debt distress. And if you do not understand that, we'll never understand the financing paradox that has captured us in the past 60 years, and we'll never be able to shift the paradigm of financing for development. So Africa is in debt distress, but Africa is not over indebtedness. And if in another opportunity, I can prove that with numbers. We have 65%, Africa has 65% of external public debt. For a continent that has everything to build, from A to Zeta, is nothing. Particularly if we compare the 65% to Africa's fundamentals, to Africa's potential. Allow me just to provide you a quick number that I will repeat down the road. Africa loses, and I have been saying that, $500 billion on an annual basis. Is a flow that leaves Africa on an annual basis, $500 billion. Let's compare this flow with Africa's external public debt stock in 2022, around 654 billion. So on an annual basis, we lose 500 billion, and you have a stock in terms of external public debt of 656. So this gives Africa a payback period of 1 year, 2.2 months. It's nothing. It's nothing. So let's challenge this narrative. So as we embark on this inquiry, we peel back the layers of a complex reality, as Jacob said. It's a reality where the sovereignty to make independent economic choice is often compromised, and where external influences and pressures by an out-of-date international financial architecture, said a couple of times by our Secretary General, often overshadow internal policy making space. So, yes, we agree that Africa is in debt distress, but not because it's over-indebted. Let's ask what is the root cause, and then we move to the second item of my remarks, the financing paradox, and the need to shift the paradigm of financing for development. Allow me to provide you a couple of figures very quickly. First, I would like to ask to everybody in this meeting, please, if we can leave this retreat by strongly acknowledging that Africa's development today is financed to a large extent with its own resources. Africa's development today is not financed with external resources. This is a myth. As we speak, Africa's development is financed to a large extent with its own resources. A couple of numbers. The sum of, let's say, Africa's own resources, from public revenues to private savings, in around 2020 was around $900 billion. Allow me to repeat this number, $900 billion. Don't forget, please, that Africa loses 500 billion annually. And add up these two. Around 20 times more than inward foreign direct investments, and 16.5 times more than ODA. So ODA does not finance Africa's development. We need to ask, how come it becomes the driver of designing policymaking in Africa? This is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Second number, the financing paradox. I'm sure that we already noticed that, and my dear brother Jacob mentioned that eloquently, Africa loses $500 billion on an annual basis. I used to say that Africa loses $500 billion with its right hand and begs for ODA with its left hand. This is a paradox that needs to be break. Not only $89 billion on illicit financial flows, but you have $70 billion in inefficient public spending, $46 billion in redundant tax expansion, let's say inefficient tax expansions, and not a misuse or underperform 84 billion, not to say 100 billion in remittances. Africa has $1.3 trillion in pension funds outside Africa. Let's assume that we could mobilize 10% of that on an annual basis, meaning that Africa is losing an opportunity of getting $100 billion only from its own $1.3 trillion in pension funds. More, Africa is missing a huge opportunity to mobilize between 100 billion and 200 billion in carbon markets. How come a continent that loses between 500 and 600 billion dollars as a financing means of implementation issue? So I do believe that the first conclusion that we need to take is, if Africa loses, it's because Africa has been able to generate. I cannot, as I said in Addis, if I'm not mistaken, we can only lose what we have. I can only lose my mobile if I have a mobile. If I don't have a mobile, I cannot lose it. If Africa loses $500 billion, means that Africa has the ability, has the capacity to generate $500 billion. So the problem of Africa is not generating economic flows. The problem is not generating financial flows. The problem lies down the road, is mobilizing what Africa has the capacity to generate. And this brings us to the root cause of the financing paradox. Africa has a huge deficit in terms of controlling its own economic and financial flows. And of course, this puts Africa in a situation to be completely vulnerable to external shocks, because external shocks are a given in the system. They are not surprise. They have been happening in the past 200 years, and they will happen in the next 200 years. The fact that every external shock put us on our knees is because we do not control our, let's say, our flows. This lack of control of economic and financial flows is the root causes of the financing paradox and consequently of Africa's debt distress. Let's move to the third item of my presentation. How does UN development system support African member states in achieving sustainable financing or addressing this paradox, addressing the financing paradox, understanding the root causes of debt distress in Africa, and not just, sorry to say it, and not just repeating, sometimes in a mechanic way, the global narrative that explains everything with over-indebtedness, and by providing the explanations, a set of policies with a high level of conditionality just lands in Africa, preventing Africa to make the necessary, let's say, investments. UN development system has a huge opportunity. Jakub said brilliantly, a huge opportunity to play in this picture. But allow me to understand the UN development system opportunity. We need to apply a demand-supply approach, if you allow me. Sorry, I'm bringing my private sector mindset, if you allow me. Africa is our client. Africa is the most important client of the UN system. Is one of the 8 priorities. That's enough. But Africa represents the demand. If it's our client, we are the UN system. So Africa represents for us the demand side. And we, UN system, we are the supply side. In the private sector, a basic demarche is to profile your client. If you profile your client wrongly, you'll be out of business. You will be out of business. And how the UN system have been profiling, in my opinion, its main client, its priority, has been profiling its client, Africa, as deprived of financial resources. It's not true. It's not true. If we lose $500 billion and you are already financing our own development by generating more than $900 billion, so we cannot be seen as a continent deprived of financial resources. So if we profile wrongly our client, of course, our deliver model, our business model will be designed not in the best, let's say, in the best way. And this is, and the international not only the UN system, the international cooperation has been profiling in a wrong way Africa, and consequently, the business model that we have been delivered, the international cooperation system has been delivered in the past 40 years, as not generate value, as everybody knows, and not generate impact. As George, my dear colleague, mentioned, Africa so far is on track. Out of the 140 SDG targets, we succeed in delivering between 12% and 14%, which means completely out of target. So to profile wrongly our client Africa makes us from as a deprived continent from a financial resource standpoint, creates policy space to position ODA as the key financing tool for development. Is not. ODA can play, yes, indeed, a critical role. ODA can deliver much more value than delivers, but it cannot be in the driver's seat. It cannot. The driver's seat, based on the numbers that I had the opportunity to say here, should be, and my dear colleague George mentioned that, domestic resources mobilization. The R stands for resources, not revenues, not only revenues and taxes, resources in general, particularly the resources linked to raw materials, critical minerals, and commodities. So this, if you agree with me, the need for the UN system to profile Africa correctly, put us in a position to say, okay, how can I help my client to not to lose the $500 billion? How can I help my client to eliminate the $70 billion inefficient public spending? How can I help my client to eliminate the $46 billion inefficient tax exemptions? How can I help my client in grabbing the $100 billion from pension funds, etc., etc.? This means that this moves me to the, let's say, to the next issue of my intervention. So we need to acknowledge that Africa has enough financial resources to tap international capital markets. Africa does not need to tap international capital markets by issuing Eurobonds with a 10-year maturity, a 2-year grace period, and interest rates of 10% to finance current expenditures. So Africa has financial resources to tap international capital market by leveraging Africa's billions to deliver trillions. The question is, what is our value proposition as a UN system? What if we agree that we need to reprofile our client? We need to recognize that our client generates economic flows. Our client generates financial flows. What should be our value proposition going forward for the next 25 years? And particularly considering that financial resources are not UN's main assets. The money in the world is not in the UN system. The money in the world is not in the national budgets. The money in the world is in international capital markets and just flowing everywhere in the world. We are not an international financial institution. We need to recognize that. So financial resources is not our main asset. Africa, as I said, generates financial resources and is not able to mobilize them. But this is not what is missing on Africa's side, money. Where is the money? Again, in the global. So to respond to the value proposition question, allow me to propose 3 small steps, if you allow me. First, international cooperation needs to adjust the perception of its major clients. Africa generates financial resources. Second, UN system is the best place, allow me to repeat with all my proudness. UN system is the best place to support Africa getting the right risk profile to tap international capital markets. Position UN system as a de-risking tool. Leverage our main comparative advantage, which money is not, financial resource is not our main comparative advantage. What are our main comparative advantage to help countries getting the right risk profile and to tap international capital markets in a much better position? First, data. We are the best data hub in the world. Second, knowledge. We are the best knowledge hub in the world. Third, we are the only system that has a global, continental, national, and local footprint. I challenge other international systems. And fourth, the most important, trust. I don't know if you notice, all four are intangible assets, which are our main company. And of course, the third step is the Secretary General UN 2.0. So UN 2.0, I'm sure that you went through UN 2.0. The main purpose is exactly through these four intangible assets, position the UN system as the preferred partner to all African governments and help these same governments reshape, redesign the risk profile. So a country as Eswatini, Cape Verde, Angola, Mozambique can tap international capital markets in a different level. So the value chain adjust our perception of Africa's profile as our client, match with UN major and intangible assets, and adjust the delivery model. Again, UN system emerge out of this value chain as a strong de-risking tool. My last point, and I don't know, Jakub, if you need, you can give me the red signal. But I'm about to get in the last point. How can cooperation between international financial institutions, UNDS, and African member states be improved to scale up investments for national sustainable development priorities? Again, the first question is, where is the money? We need to understand where is the money, because the money is not with us. The money are not in the national budgets in Africa. Where is the money? Globally speaking, it is not in the UN system. It is in the international financial institutions and private sector. So the SDG Fund's core purpose is to support African countries in getting money from international financial institutions and private sectors. Acknowledging where the money is. In these integrate national financial frameworks are strong tools to help us deliver. So far, they have not reached the full potential as a UN tool, but they are so well designed. Let's work together and unleash there. But to help African countries to tap that money under a new delivery model should be the driver of international cooperation. How? As I said, we need to support African countries to start producing predictable cash flows. International financial institutions and private sector, what they look for are predictable cash flow. This is what I did for 10 years when working in the, let's say, in Citigroup, Citibank. How can a country move from ODA dependency to control its own economic and financial flows and put on the table, the negotiation table, predictable cash flows? It comes SDG 16 and SDG 17. We need to, in my opinion, strong institution, strong country systems, namely strong domestic resource mobilization systems are critical. Without building our own institutions, our own country systems, domestic resource mobilization system, the education system beyond building schools, health system beyond building hospitals, but the system that works today and for the next 25 years will not be able to de-risk country's profile, and will not be able to support the country generate sustainable SDG financing. Why? Because sustainable SDG financing requires minimizing SDG investment risk, because the money is with the private sector, in order to maximize SDG investments. So I stop here, and I would like to close with a sentence, if you allow me. The Africa we want, all in this room, is the Africa the world needs. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Back to you, George, my colleague.